If you've ever done something kind for a stranger and wondered if it even mattered, then this story is going to hit you harder than you expect. Margaret Hayes was standing at a bus stop on a Tuesday afternoon when she noticed a brown leather wallet lying in the gutter. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was more cash than she had seen in 5 years. But what she did with that wallet set off a chain of events that would change her life and the life of one man forever. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where are you watching from? New York? London? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Now, let me tell you about Margaret. She was 53 years old, a short woman with deep brown eyes and hands that were always dry from cleaning. She had been a housekeeper for 21 years.
21 years of scrubbing other people's floors, washing other people's dishes, folding other people's laundry. She never once complained. Not once. She lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on Greenfield Road, the kind of place where the hallway light flickered every evening around 6, and the kitchen faucet dripped no matter how many times the landlord said he fixed it. The walls were thin. You could hear the neighbor's television through the plaster. But Margaret kept that apartment spotless. She had a small wooden cross above the front door, and a framed photograph of her late husband Paul on the shelf by the window. Paul had passed away 7 years ago from a heart condition. He was only 49. She had one daughter, Lily. Lily was 24 and worked the night shift at a warehouse across town. Lily had big, round eyes just like her mother, and a quiet voice that made people lean in whenever she spoke. She wore the same pair of black sneakers every single day because she could not afford a second pair.
Lily had a son, a 4-year-old boy named Caleb. Caleb was the kind of child who could walk into a room and make everyone smile without saying a word. He had curly hair that Margaret would comb every morning while he sat on the kitchen counter eating toast with strawberry jam. That boy loved strawberry jam more than anything in the world. Margaret took care of Caleb during the day while Lily worked. She would walk him to the park 3 blocks away, push him on the swings, and buy him a small vanilla ice cream from the cart near the fountain if she had enough coins in her pocket. Most days she did not, but she always found a way. Now, Margaret had a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she cleaned a house on Belmont Avenue for a woman named Mrs. Tate. Mrs. Tate was 70 years old, lived alone, and had more rooms in her house than she could ever use.
Margaret had been cleaning for Mrs. Tate for 11 years. 11 years of arriving at 8 in the morning, leaving at 2 in the afternoon, and receiving the same $120 each visit. Mrs. Tate never raised Margaret's pay. Not once in 11 years. Margaret never asked her to. That was just who Margaret was. On that Tuesday afternoon, Margaret had just finished at Mrs. Tate's house. She was walking to the bus stop on Cedar Lane, the one with the cracked bench and the faded advertisement for a mattress company that had gone out of business years ago. The air smelled like rain, that thick, heavy smell that comes right before a storm. She could feel the dampness settling on her arms. That is when she saw it. A wallet, brown leather, sitting in the gutter right next to the drain. It was swollen from being stepped on, the edges dark with street water. She bent down and picked it up. She wiped it on the side of her coat and opened it. Inside were $800 bills. $800.
Margaret stared at that money for a long time. Her rent was due in 4 days. She owed $460, and she only had $210 saved up in a jar on top of her refrigerator. That jar had a piece of tape on the front that said, "Caleb's birthday," because she had been saving for months to throw him a real party. He had never had one. $800 would have solved everything. Rent, the party, maybe even a new pair of shoes for Lily. But Margaret did not take the money. She looked through the wallet for identification. Behind a gas station receipt and a dry cleaning ticket, she found a driver's license. The name on it was Richard Ames. The photograph showed a man with silver hair and a serious expression. The address was on Wexford Lane. Margaret knew that street. It was on the other side of town, where the houses had iron gates and the driveways were long enough to get tired walking up them.
She could have left the wallet at the bus stop. She could have dropped it in a mailbox. She could have taken the cash and tossed the rest. Nobody would have known. But Margaret tucked the wallet into her bag, got on the bus, transferred twice,
and rode 45 minutes across town to return it in person. When she arrived at the address on Wexford Lane, she stood at the bottom of a long driveway looking up at a house that seemed to belong in a magazine. White stone walls, black shutters, a garden with roses blooming in perfect rows. She could smell the flowers from the sidewalk. She walked up to the front door and rang the bell. A woman opened the door. She was tall, thin, maybe mid-40s, with blonde hair pulled tight and a silk blouse that looked like it cost more than Margaret made in a week. The woman looked Margaret up and down. Her eyes paused on Margaret's worn coat and her scuffed shoes. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, and her voice was not warm. Margaret held up the wallet. "I found this at a bus stop on Cedar Lane. The license inside says Richard Ames. Does he live here?" The woman's expression changed slightly. She took the wallet, opened it, counted the bills. Then she looked at Margaret again. "It's all here?" "Yes, ma'am, every dollar." The woman stared at her for a moment. Then she reached into the wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and held it toward Margaret. "For your trouble," she said. Margaret shook her head. "That's all right. I didn't do it for money." The woman shrugged, put the 20 back, and closed the door. No thank you. No smile. Just the click of the lock turning. Margaret stood on that porch for a few seconds. She could hear her own breathing. The roses smelled sweet, but the moment did not. She turned around, walked back down that long driveway, and waited 30 minutes for the next bus home. But what happened next changed everything. The following morning, Margaret was in her kitchen. It was just past 7. Caleb was sitting on the counter eating his toast, strawberry jam on his chin. Lily had already left for a morning meeting at the warehouse. The kitchen smelled like coffee and bread. The faucet was dripping again. Margaret was wiping down the table when there was a knock at the door. She was not expecting anyone. She wiped her hands on the towel hanging from the oven handle and walked to the front door. She opened it. Standing there was a man. Tall, silver hair, dark suit. He looked exactly like the photograph on the driver's license. Richard Ames. Behind him in the street was a black car with tinted windows, the kind of car Margaret had only ever seen in movies. "Mrs. Hayes?" he said. Margaret's stomach tightened. "Yes?" "My name is Richard Ames. You returned my wallet yesterday." Margaret nodded slowly. "I did. May I come in for a moment?" Now, Margaret was not the kind of woman who let strangers into her home, but something about the way this man stood there, hat in hand, eyes soft, made her step aside. Richard Ames walked into Margaret's apartment and looked around. He saw the cracked ceiling, the dripping faucet, the small television with the bent antenna, the jar on the refrigerator with the tape that said, "Caleb's birthday." And then he saw Caleb, sitting on the counter with jam on his face, staring up at this stranger with wide, curious eyes. "Hi," Caleb said. Just like that. No fear, no shyness, just hi. Richard smiled. It was the first time his face had softened since he walked in. "Hi there, young man. What are you eating?" "Toast," Caleb said. "With jam. You want some?" Richard looked at Margaret. His eyes were wet. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to tell you something." He sat down at her small kitchen table. The chair creaked under him. Margaret sat across from him, her hands folded on the table, her heart beating fast. "That wallet you returned," Richard began. "My wife told me a woman brought it back. She described you. I asked if she thanked you. She said she offered you $20. I asked if you took it. She said no." He paused. "Mrs. Hayes, there was $800 in that wallet. I know what this neighborhood looks like. I know what your life probably looks like. And you brought every dollar back." Margaret said nothing. She just looked at him. "I need to tell you why that wallet matters," he said. "It was my father's. He passed away 3 months ago. That wallet is all I have left of him. The money inside I could replace in a second, but the wallet itself, the receipt from the last dinner I had with him, the dry cleaning ticket he never picked up, those things are worth more than anything I own." Margaret felt her throat tighten. She understood that kind of loss, and that was only the beginning. Richard leaned forward. "I want to do something for you. What do you need?" Margaret shook her head. "Mr. Ames, I didn't return your wallet for a reward. I know that. That is exactly why I am here. But Margaret would not ask for anything. She changed the subject. She offered him coffee. He accepted. They sat at that tiny table and talked for almost an hour. He told her about his father. She told him about Paul. Caleb climbed down from the counter and brought Richard a piece of paper with a crayon drawing of a yellow sun. "That's for you," Caleb said. Richard held that paper like it was made of gold. When Richard left, he shook Margaret's hand at the door. "You'll hear from me," he said. Margaret did not think much of it. Rich people said things like that all the time. They never meant it. But Richard Ames was not like other rich people. Not even close. 2 days later, a man in a blue uniform knocked on Margaret's door. He said he was a plumber. He said someone had hired him to fix her faucet. Margaret told him there must be a mistake. He showed her the work order. It had Richard's name on it. The plumber fixed the faucet in 30 minutes. For the first time in 2 years, Margaret's kitchen was silent. The next week, a woman from a catering company called. She said she had been hired to plan a birthday party for a child named Caleb. She said the party would include a bounce house, a cake shaped like a dinosaur, 12 gift bags, and a magician. Margaret sat down on the edge of her bed and cried. Now, here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. That Sunday, Margaret got a call from a number she did not recognize. It was Richard. He asked if she could meet him at a coffee shop downtown the following afternoon. Margaret agreed, though she was nervous. She pressed her best blouse and took 2 buses to get there. When she arrived, Richard was sitting in a booth near the window. Across from him was a woman Margaret had never seen before. She was short, dark-haired, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Richard introduced her as Susan Cole, the director of a non-profit called Fresh Start Homes. Richard looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been thinking about this since the day I met you. I own several properties in this city. One of them is a small house on Maple Street, 3 bedrooms, a yard, recently renovated. It has been sitting empty for 5 months. Margaret's hands started to shake. "I would like you and your family to live there, rent-free, for as long as you need." Margaret could not speak. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed both hands flat on the table to stop them from trembling. "Mr. Ames," she finally whispered, "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I didn't earn it." Richard leaned back. "Mrs. Hayes, I have employees who earn 6 figures a year. Not one of them would have returned that wallet. You earn more respect than anyone I know." But what Margaret did not know yet was that Richard had already discovered something about her life that made this offer even more urgent. He had asked Susan Cole to look into Margaret's situation. Susan had found out that Margaret's landlord was planning to sell the building on Greenfield Road. Every tenant had received a notice. They had 60 days to leave. Margaret had not told anyone, not even Lily. She'd been lying awake every night staring at the ceiling, wondering where they would go. When Richard told her he knew, Margaret broke down. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Richard did not say a word. He just sat there and let her cry. Susan reached across the table and placed her hand over Margaret's. "Honey, this is not charity. This is somebody recognizing your character. There is a difference." But someone else was not happy about this arrangement at all. Richard's wife, Vanessa. When Richard told Vanessa what he was doing, she was furious. She stood in their kitchen, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're giving a house to a cleaning lady?" she said. "I'm giving a house to a good woman who did a good thing." "Richard, do you hear yourself? We don't even know this person. She could be running some kind of scam." "A scam?" She returned $800 she clearly needed. She refused a $20 tip. "What kind of scam is that?" Vanessa pressed her lips together. "I don't care. I don't want you involved with these people." Richard stared at his wife. He said nothing for a long time. Then he spoke quietly. "Vanessa, my father grew up poor. He worked in a factory for 30 years. He built everything we have from nothing. And the one thing he taught me is that character matters more than comfort." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Your father again." Richard's jaw tightened. "Yes, my father. The man whose wallet this woman returned. The wallet you didn't even bother to thank her for." Vanessa went silent. She picked up her wine glass, walked out of the kitchen, and did not speak to Richard for 2 days. But the real shock was still coming. Vanessa was not just angry about the house. She was hiding something. For the past 3 years, Vanessa had been secretly moving money out of one of Richard's business accounts. Not large amounts, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. Over 3 years, it had added up to over $90,000. She had been funneling it into a private account under her maiden name. She was planning to leave Richard and take as much as she could before he noticed. The only person who knew was Vanessa's sister, Diane. And Diane had a big mouth. One afternoon, Richard's accountant called. He said he had found inconsistencies in the quarterly report. Numbers that did not add up. Missing transfers. Richard hired an auditor. The auditor traced every dollar, and every dollar led back to Vanessa. Richard sat alone in his office that night. The room was dark except for the desk lamp. He held his father's wallet in his hands and turned it over and over. The leather was cracked, soft, warm from his grip. He thought about Margaret Hayes, a woman who found $800 and brought it back. Then he thought about his wife, a woman who had access to everything and still stole from him. He did not shout. He did not throw anything. He just sat there in the silence and let the truth settle into his bones. The next morning, he confronted Vanessa. She denied everything at first. Then she blamed him. She said he was distant. She said he worked too much. She said she deserved security. Richard placed a folder on the table. Bank statements, transfer records, account numbers. "You had security," he said. "You had this house, these cars, this life. And still you took from me behind my back." Vanessa's face went white. A woman I had never met found my wallet and returned every cent. My own wife stole $90,000. That is the difference between character and comfort, Vanessa. And I know which one I would rather have in my life. Vanessa picked up the folder, looked at the papers, and set them back down. She did not apologize. She simply said, "I want the beach house." Richard shook his head. "You'll hear from my lawyer." If you think that was the end, it was not. Not even close. The divorce moved quickly. Vanessa hired an aggressive attorney. She tried to claim that Richard had been giving away marital assets by offering Margaret the house. She argued that the house should be part of the settlement. Her lawyer filed a motion. Richard called Margaret. He told her what was happening. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, the phone pressed against her ear, and her stomach dropped. "Mr. Ames, please. Don't fight over this because of me. I don't need the house. We'll find somewhere." "Mrs. Hayes, this has nothing to do with you. This is about my wife trying to control what I do with properties I owned before our marriage. That house on Maple Street was mine before I ever met her. She has no claim." The judge agreed. The house was Richard's separate property. Vanessa's motion was denied. She left the courtroom without looking at anyone. And just when Richard thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. Vanessa went to the press. She called a local news station and told them a story about her husband giving away a house to a stranger while divorcing his loyal wife. She painted Margaret as a con artist. She painted Richard as a fool. A reporter showed up at Margaret's apartment. Margaret had never spoken to a reporter in her life. She stood in her doorway, Caleb behind her leg, and the camera pointed at her face. "Mrs. Hayes, is it true that Richard Ames is giving you a house for free?" Margaret looked at the camera. She was shaking, but she spoke clearly. "I found a wallet with $800 in it. I returned it because that is what my mother taught me to do. Mr. Ames offered me a home for my family. I did not ask for it. I did not expect it. And I would give it back tomorrow if it meant my family could just be left in peace." The reporter asked one more question. "Why did you return the wallet?" Margaret looked down at Caleb. Then she looked back at the camera. "Because I want my grandson to grow up knowing that doing the right thing is never the wrong thing." That clip aired that evening, and it did not go the way Vanessa planned. People were furious, but not at Margaret, at Vanessa. The comments section filled with hundreds of messages supporting Margaret. Donations started coming in from strangers across the country. A local church offered to help with Caleb's daycare. A women's group sent Lily a gift card for new work shoes. Richard watched the news segment from his office. He picked up the phone and called Margaret. "You did good," he said.
"I didn't do anything," Margaret replied. "I just told the truth." Richard paused. Then he said, "That's exactly what my father would have said." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Vanessa received her share as determined by the court. She moved to another city. She did not say goodbye to anyone. Now let me tell you what happened after the storm passed. Margaret, Lily, and Caleb moved into the house on Maple Street on a Saturday morning in October. The air was crisp and smelled like fallen leaves. The house was more beautiful than Margaret had imagined. Hardwood floors, a kitchen with a window that looked out onto a small backyard with a single oak tree, 3 bedrooms, a bathtub that did not leak. Caleb ran through every room. He touched every wall. He opened every closet. Then he ran into the backyard and stood under the oak tree, looked up at the branches and laughed. Just laughed. No words, just pure joy from a 4-year-old boy standing in his own yard for the first time in his life. Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. Lily came up behind her and wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Richard came by that afternoon with a housewarming gift. It was a small wooden frame with a piece of paper inside. The paper was Caleb's crayon drawing of the yellow sun. Richard had kept it. He had it framed. "He gave me this the first day I met him," Richard said. "It belongs in this house." Margaret hung it in the kitchen, right above the window where the light came in strongest. Over the next few months, things changed slowly. Lily got promoted to a daytime position at the warehouse. She bought herself 2 new pairs of shoes. Margaret still cleaned houses, but now she only worked 3 days a week instead of 5. She spent the other 2 days with Caleb. They planted tomatoes in the backyard. Caleb watered them every morning with a small green watering can that Richard had brought over one afternoon. Richard visited once a month. He and Margaret would sit at her kitchen table, drink coffee, and talk. Sometimes about their lives, sometimes about their losses. They had both lost someone they loved deeply. That shared wound became the foundation of a friendship neither of them expected. One evening in December, Margaret was tucking Caleb into bed. His room had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Lily had put them there the first week. Caleb lay on his back, looking up at the stars, his small hands folded on his chest. "Grandma?" he said. "Yes, baby?" "Is this our house for real?" Margaret smoothed his hair. "Yes, sweetheart. This is our house for real." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you found that wallet, Grandma, because now we have a home." Margaret turned off the light. She stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to him breathe. Then she walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and looked at the crayon sun hanging in its wooden frame. The faucet did not drip. The walls did not creak. The house was warm and full and quiet. She folded her hands and whispered, "Thank you, Paul. I think we're going to be okay." And they were. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next story.